Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today, we're diving into a topic that's really important to me, and I know it's something that affects a lot of people out there. Gambling addiction. You know, we like to have fun on this show, we love games, we love to laugh, but it's so important to remember that for some people, gambling isn't fun, it's a serious problem. We're going to take a deep dive into the causes of gambling addiction. And let me tell you, it's a lot more complex than you might think. It's not just about willpower or making bad choices. There are so many factors that can contribute to this addiction, and we're going to break them all down in a way that's easy to understand. Because knowledge is power, people. Let's get into it. So, first up, let's talk about the psychology behind gambling addiction. You know, what's going on in the minds of people who struggle with this? Well, sometimes it starts with certain personality traits. Some people are just naturally more impulsive, more likely to take risks, and that can make them more vulnerable to developing a gambling problem. And then there are these things called cognitive distortions. Big word, I know, but it basically means that people with gambling addiction might see things a little differently. They might tell themselves, "This is my lucky day," or "I'm due for a win," even though, logically, those things aren't necessarily true. It's like they're wearing those funny glasses that distort your vision, you know? And of course, we can't forget about the emotional aspect. For a lot of people, gambling becomes a way to cope with difficult emotions, like stress, anxiety, or even depression. It's a temporary escape from reality, but unfortunately, it can quickly spiral out of control. Now, this next part might surprise you, but did you know that biology plays a role in gambling addiction too? It's true! Research has shown that genetics can actually make some people more susceptible to addictive behaviors, including gambling. It's like some of us are just wired differently, and that's okay. It's just about being aware of it. And then there are neurochemicals, like dopamine. Dopamine is like the feel-good chemical in our brains. And guess what? Gambling can trigger a surge of dopamine, which makes people feel really good, at least for a little while. But over time, the brain can become dependent on that dopamine rush, and that's when it can turn into a serious addiction. And get this, studies have even shown that people with gambling addiction might have differences in the structure of their brains, especially in the areas that control impulse control and decision-making. It's fascinating, but also a little scary, right? Okay, so we've talked about what's going on in the mind and the body, but now let's talk about the environment. Because believe it or not, the people and places around us can have a huge impact on whether or not someone develops a gambling addiction. For example, if someone grows up in a family where gambling is common, they're more likely to gamble themselves. It's like it becomes normalized for them. And then there's peer pressure, especially for young people. You know, when their friends are all doing it, it can be really hard to resist. And let's not forget about accessibility. With online gambling and casinos popping up everywhere, it's easier than ever for people to gamble. And that easy access can be really dangerous, especially for people who are already struggling with addiction. Now, this next part is really important because gambling addiction often doesn't exist in a vacuum. It often goes hand in hand with other mental health issues. It's like a 2-for-1 deal that nobody wants. You know what I mean? For instance, people with substance abuse problems, whether it's alcohol or drugs, are much more likely to also have a gambling addiction. And vice versa. It's like one addiction can fuel the other. And it's not just substance abuse. gambling addiction can also be linked to other behavioral addictions, like shopping addiction or even sex addiction. The important thing to remember is that these issues are often interconnected, and it's crucial to address all of them to really help someone recover. Okay, so far we've talked about individual factors, but we also have to address the elephant in the room, and that's the role that society plays in all of this. Because let's face it, our culture often glamorizes gambling. We see it in movies, we hear it in music, it's everywhere. And in some cultures, gambling is deeply ingrained in traditions and social gatherings. It can be seen as a harmless form of entertainment, which, let's be honest, it can be, but that doesn't mean it's not without its risks, right? And then there's the economic side of things. In some communities, gambling is seen as a way to make quick money, especially in areas where there are limited economic opportunities. It's a sad reality, but it's something we need to talk about. So, we've covered a lot of ground today, but I want to end by talking about triggers because even if someone has all these risk factors we've been discussing, there's usually a specific event or emotion that pushes them towards gambling in the first place. Sometimes it's a major life change, like a job loss, the death of a loved one, or even something positive like a big win. It's like any major emotional upheaval can make someone more vulnerable to addictive behaviors. And then there are those everyday emotions that we all experience: boredom, loneliness, stress. These feelings can be really tough. And for someone struggling with a gambling addiction, gambling can feel like a way to escape those negative emotions, even if it's just for a little while. Wow, that was a lot, right? We covered everything from brain chemistry to societal pressures and everything in between. But I hope this deep dive has helped you understand that gambling addiction is a complex issue with many underlying causes. It's not about being weak or lacking willpower. It's about a combination of factors that can create a perfect storm for addiction. Understanding these causes is so important, not just for those struggling with addiction, but also for their loved ones and for society as a whole. The more we know, the better equipped we are to support those in need and to create a world where addiction is met with compassion and effective treatment. Thanks for listening. You guys are the best. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time for another important conversation.